Good afternoon. Mike Rounds here. Thank you for taking a few minutes with me this afternoon. I'd like to take just a few moments and discuss steps that I've taken today to address the cattle market crisis that we are in the middle of. In recent years, cattle producers have suffered from an undervalued product and low market prices, despite a consistent and growing demand for U.S. beef. This has only intensified in recent months following a fire at a meatpacking facility and now the spread of COVID-19. We're at the point where many South Dakota ranching families are on the brink of going under. Simply is not acceptable. There are some steps that I believe we can take to reverse this trend, and I think we need to act now. So today I've taken a number of steps that I believe would provide much needed assistance for our cattle producers. Now, before I get into a great deal of detail on this, I want to quickly thank just a few folks who I believe have been instrumental in helping us work through these issues and have come up with some common sense and workable solutions. State Senator Gary Kamak, the author of the MCOOL resolution in the South Dakota legislature, has been key in trying to coordinate with a lot of different groups to come up with an appropriate resolution that we have forwarded to the president. James Halverson and the South Dakota stock growers have been working with us. Ty Lataw has been working with us as a producer. And then the folks over at the Fort Pierce Sale Barn they've been working and expressing the concerns, but also trying to come up with ways that actually will make a difference for producers throughout, not just in South Dakota, but throughout the upper Midwest. So I want to say thank you to those folks, and we've appreciated their patience and their attitude in trying to get something done and show some results. Today, Senators Kevin Cramer, John Hoeven, Steve Daines, and I have sent a letter to the Department of Justice urging the agency to investigate continued allegations of price fixing within the cattle market. Just last summer, we saw the most recent allegation that resulted in the Department of Agriculture investigating the packers. That investigation is still underway. Additionally, we are asking the Department of Justice to definitively answer whether a packer oligopoly exists within the cattle market and inherently creates an anti-competitive marketplace that unfairly disadvantages the cattle producer and the consumer. Cattle producers are seeing record losses at this point, and meanwhile, the shelf price of meat is at record highs, and boxed beef prices are increasing as well. These margins just don't make any sense. The reality is that there is an inverse correlation between the producer's price and the consumer's price. We just want to know why. If the Department of Justice finds that there are no violations, then we must reconsider the statutory environment of this industry because the status quo simply is not working. We need these answers quickly and decisively to protect the integrity of the industry and every stakeholder, including consumers who are footing the bill. Now, I've also sent a letter to President Trump supporting efforts to reinstate mandatory country of origin labeling, or MCOOL. Since MCOOL's 2015 repeal, the American producers of beef and pork have endured a competitive disadvantage when marketing their products. Moreover, U.S. consumers are unable to differentiate between domestic and foreign products that enter the U.S. from more than 20 foreign countries. Because of existing loopholes within USDA regulations, today's marketplace currently allows foreign beef to be labeled as a U.S. product. Consumers deserve transparency when they're purchasing beef. When South Dakota families purchase beef-labeled product of the USA, they should know with certainty that it is coming from one of our top-quality producers. Reinstating MCOOL would accomplish that. Now, we're asking the president to get involved. We're asking the president to help us solve this problem. We know that the president has an interest in working with farmers and ranchers, and what we're asking the president to do is to get involved and to help us get past this point. We know that it would require his direct participation in renegotiating certain areas to allow us to get that done, but we're convinced this is the right thing for producers to do. This week, I also submitted legislation to Senate leadership to include in a COVID-19 response bill or other legislation that would direct the Secretary of Agriculture to use the Commodity Credit Corporation, or CCC, to offset losses cattle producers take in the live and feeder cattle markets. The legislation would use USDA Economic Research Service projections for 2020 as a baseline for market losses. Producers would report to their local FSA office the month or months in which they sold their cattle and the amount they sold. USDA would then use the reported average sales prices compared to the indexed feeder or live cattle average to determine the COVID-19 market disruption. And that's what this is based on, is in response to the COVID-19 market disruption that's occurring right now. There's no doubt that our cattle producers are suffering as a direct result from the COVID-19 outbreak. Like so many other sectors of our economy right now, they need relief. We should not let this go without helping them. Now, with that, look, I'll just give you one example of kind of how this would work. The legislation uses the U.S. red meat and poultry forecast for 2020 to set the index prices. $150 per hundredweight for feeder cattle and $121 per hundredweight for live cattle. This is USDA's Economic Research Service projections for prices for 2020. USDA tracks a monthly average and reports 10 to 15 days, typically after the end of the month. So within a few weeks after the end of a producer, or the month in which a producer sells, they could go to FSA to show their sales and qualify for that month's calculated compensations. We've also put in there a limit of up to $10,000 per head per entity. We've been working with supportive colleagues and leadership to try to get this, or a version of this, included in the Recovery Part 3 package. I'm hopeful at this point that the legislation will openly address this cattle crisis. And I look at this is one of those things where you look at all the different things that you should be doing for the different organizations and industries, and our cow-calf operators, our feeders, and so forth. They need to be brought into this because they are suffering just like everybody else is, and that's what this is intended to do, is to take some of that pain away and to give them a fighting chance to survive what is a downturn, and one in which, if not taken care of, may very well result in bankruptcies for a lot of farm families through no fault of their own. With that, I'll be happy to try to take any questions you may have.
Senator Rounds, this is Brian Hanston at Fort Pierre Livestock. Appreciate you taking the time to visit. I did have a question. You said that the USDA program, you did a $10,000 per entity cap, if I understood you correctly. And I guess I just wanted to make mention of the fact that...
Yeah, hey, Brian, no, it's not $10,000. And if I said that, I'm wrong. It's a $10,000 head cap per entity.
10,000 head.
10,000 head limitation.
Oh.
Yeah. Does that help a little bit?
Well, it does. I guess my actual statement to the whole payment program is that, you know, if you look at the gap in the price of these fat cattle, 110 to 112 was the live base weight, or the live cash bid yesterday, and the USDA reported packer equivalent of selling boxed meat. They equate that back to a live steer. It was like $1.60 something per pound. So you're talking about a huge spread, and I guess in my head, rather than the government spending tax dollars to try to keep producers afloat, if something can be done in the very near future to fix that spread so that the packer isn't, they're six to, in some cases, over 700 a head in profit. And they own that animal for less than 14 days, but the guy that fed it for the last 6 to 8 months was hoping to make $100 a head and is now losing $300 to over $400 a head. To me, fixing the problem, I'd rather have a way figured out to level the playing field with a packer versus spending taxpayer dollars agriculture.
Yeah, Brian, look, I appreciate what you're saying. There's no question. I'd much rather. There's two parts to this. Number one, clearly we have, across this country right now, we have a reduction in the marketing capabilities because of COVID-19. That's what this particular piece of legislation is based upon. Is trying to at least help those folks that may not be able to fix in a matter of weeks what we've seen going on with the issues surrounding the challenges with the packers. If we could do that in a very short period of time, that may very well take a large part of this out of the picture. But for that producer out there that's underwater, as you've indicated, I think there are times in which the federal government needs to step in during pandemic situations like this. And so, yeah, I don't like just saying that we're creating a program that does nothing. But for a guy that's trying to make it through some tough times, sometimes you got to look at what the government can do, and then you get back to having an open market again like you want. And that's the reason why this is a three-pronged effort. It's the reason why, number one, we've asked the president to get actively involved in trying to redo the USMCA so that we can actually get the mandatory country of origin labeling back in again like it was before. And during that same time period, and look, we need all hands on deck, and we just think that we want that president to know that we would be fully supportive of him being actively involved in this. And at the same time, while we're doing that, let's draw attention to the fact that the livestock industry has had challenges, and they've had questions about whether or not the existing statutes have been good in terms of taking care of what they feel is unfair competition and an unfair marketplace. So we're going after it all three ways, and some of them may take a little bit longer than others to get done, but in the meantime, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that these producers out there get treated fairly and that they get an opportunity to get some assistance and some relief, the same as guys that are working downtown in small businesses. And, I wish we didn't have to, but by golly, sometimes you got to do what you got to do to get by the tough times. And I think we need all three approaches, and we're going to take all three approaches. But I appreciate your comments, Brian. I understand how strongly you feel on this, and you've been one of the proponents for a lot of years. Anything else out there?
Senator Rounds, this is Dave Steffen.
Hey, Dave.
Back to Brian's point, maybe with the New York Justice investigation, might shine the spotlight on them, and maybe just shine the spotlight on how unfair the Packers are treating people right now. It might cause them to loosen their purse strings. So in the meantime, while you're working on getting done what you're doing, which I think is a good deal, if you can get it passed, will help. But like this week, I think beef cutouts since Friday are up almost $40 a hundredweight. And they came into the beginning of the week trying to buy cattle lower again, and it's just obscene profits, and it just really upsets a lot of producers how they can get away with this. So, but what you're doing will surely help keep people in business, and we really appreciate it. Just want you to know that.
Dave, thanks. You and I have known each other a long, long time, and this is one of those things where I think we pull out all the stops. We do everything we can to try to get this thing moving in the right direction. But the reality is, when I talk with you guys and when we sit down and visit, regardless of what time of the year it is, most guys back there, they just want a fair shake at trying to make a fair deal in a fair market. And the vast majority feel very, very strongly that this is not a fair market, and they want some help to make it fair. And I think that's what we're trying to get across here is number one, if the Justice Department looks at this and says, hey, everybody's abiding by the law, then by golly, the law ought to be changed. And at the same time, if they're not abiding by the law, then let's find out what it is and let's get it fixed. Because there's folks out there hurting. And time we just grab a hold of this thing and go after it. So thank you, Dave, and I appreciate your input into this stuff as well.
What a lot of producers are worried about, too, Senator, is that, all of a sudden, the banks, at the bank you may have it renewed, but it's on demand note, so all of a sudden they're looking at somebody that's got, even a small producer that's got 500,000 head of cattle, and our net worth just dropped $300,000 to $400,000 in a matter of a month. They can call that notice. And so, how are we going to be able to operate if we can't get money to put a crop in, and so on? So there's a lot of worry amongst us out here that are we going to even be able to get money to operate this year? And by doing, if we can put the mind to rest, it'll go towards a big step in doing that. But I know I've had a lot of sleepless nights lately, and I get along pretty good with my bank. But when your net worth drops that much in a matter of 30 days, bankers set up and pay attention.
Yeah, and let me just share with you. It's you guys are feeling it. There's other folks in the industry right now that are feeling it. Some of them for the first time, where they've seen the value of their operations go down. Because just like as an example, if you got a hotel or a motel operation, you got 10% occupancy or 5% occupancy, and you're saying I got bills to pay at the end of the month. They're seeing that right now too. And so what we've done is a group of us went back in and we've talked with the FDIC and the OCC. And in fact, we were having a visit with the Federal Reserve and their regulatory groups, saying we want to make it very clear and that you've got to have auditors who are allowing these banks to be able to work through on these things, because they don't want the farm back, they don't want the hotel back, but their auditors have got to understand that during this time in which a banker wants to work, that they've got to have some leniency to be able to make some calls in which they don't have to classify a loan. And we've got a letter back out from the FDIC last week saying we've directed our auditors to allow those banks to work through the issues during this very difficult time. And OCC is following the same path for the national banks. And we're going to continue to work with the Federal Reserve to put that message out that this has got to be a coordinated effort. Because during this difficult time, if you got a producer out there and he's seeing values going down, the bank says, look, we understand it and we want to work with the guys. We can't have that bank get penalized by an auditor saying you're not classifying these loans. And so we're trying to make some headway in that to give you guys a little bit of headroom there as well. And hopefully this is going to come together and be a better deal. But in the meantime, we got to get through this crisis, and that means everybody's got to understand that everybody's feeling this pain, and we don't need an auditor in the middle of this thing telling some bank that they shouldn't be providing leniency and maybe carrying a note and maybe extending it back out again, because it's going to be a whole lot better if we don't have a whole lot of people having their notes called. So appreciate your comments on that. Thank you. Anything else out there real quick, like? I know they're going to come and pull me away here quick, like.
Senator, this is Doug Stumpke, South Dakota Farmers Union.
Hey, Doug.
On your stimulus bill, are we going to have a cap on how many cattle can be for one producer? I mean, I know we were talking like at 10,000 head. Is that going to be included?
In my proposal, and once again, this is all fluid, but in my proposal, I put in 10,000 head because I know there's a limited amount of money out there, and I didn't want it all to go to just one or two producers. And so, yeah, I put a 10,000 head thing on it. Once again, in the legislative process of making sausage, occasionally those things get moved around a little bit, but that's what my recommendation was, Doug. Anything else out there?
Senator, this is Dennis Hanson at Fort Pierre.
Hi, Dennis.
I just had something real quick to add to put a little bit of this into perspective as far as what's going on, and to kind of explain to people that maybe don't quite understand the difference in the pricing on these cattle. For up forever in this business up until the start of 2016 or thereabout, when we lost country boards and label, their meat, when you sold cattle in the meat, in other words, dressed, it was $1 to $2 back from what the box beef was. Sometimes because the packer got the off-ball, and there lied their profit. Today, this morning, I was told 166 to 175 were the bids in the meat. The box beef this morning was from 246 to 247. It tells you there's $70 to $80 a hundred instead of $1 or $2 a hundred in the meat difference as to what it was before we lost country boards and labeling. That kind of tells the real story of what has happened out here and what they're doing to us. And just one more quick comment: if anybody knows how to get word to President Trump I think he'd like to know where his meat's coming from. And right now, unless he's getting it from a local farmer, he darn sure don't.
Amen. And here, Dennis, here's the other piece of this. And I mean, it's the reason why we're pushing these 3 items right now. But there's another piece in there that we put in earlier, and you know about it. It's right now there's a voluntary label out there, and it's called Product of the USA. And today, a consumer walks into a grocery store because of a loophole in USDA labeling. As long as that foreign beef has been processed in the U.S., in other words, they bring it in and they repackage it. That's all it takes. From one of 20 different countries, all they got to do is repackage it, and they can sell that as product of the USA. And that's not right. Consumers should know that. And that's a voluntary label, which WTO doesn't impact. So if nothing else, we ought to get that done while we're fighting the rest of the battle. But I appreciate what you're saying, and that's exactly the message that we ought to have out there. This isn't just about ag producers. This is about consumers and getting good information to consumers. Thank you all.
Appreciate your help.
You bet. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Stay tuned. Something tells me this is page 1. Have a good day. Bye-bye.